Welcome back, everybody, to the Peer-to-Peer Policy Pod. This week, we're covering the White House's landmark report on digital assets, touching again on the AI action plan and executive orders, and much more. But big doings from the White House on digital assets, Bitcoin, and AI. Remember to follow me on X for more real-time updates at Morgenstern NJ. And remember to follow the pod. We are on Rumble, YouTube, Apple, Spotify, wherever you get your pods. Remember to like, subscribe, send us comments, questions, whatever you like, and we would love to engage with you. So, Zach, where should we start off?
Yeah, so this week we're kind of doing a special episode. We're going to do a deep dive into some stuff that the administration has put out over the last 2 weeks. And I want to start with this White House Working Group report that was released this week, the report on digital assets. The working group had a stacked roster. It had Secretary Scott Bessent, Treasury Secretary, Commerce Secretary Howard Lutnick, SEC Chair Paul Atkins, David Sachs, and Bo Hines from the White House. Marco Rubio, Pam Bondi, Kristi Noem were on it, and a lot more. And they released a lengthy 168-page report that was responsive to a week one executive order. I think it was maybe even day 3. And the executive order was entitled Strengthening American Leadership in Digital Financial Technology. And there are a lot of good things in there that provide some level of detail on the administration's position on things like market structure, the banking system and digital assets, stable coins and payments, opposing a central bank digital currency, countering illicit financing, taxation, and more. There's a lot of stuff in there. And it's all towards the broader goal of operationalizing President Trump's promise to make America the crypto capital of the world, and truly to adopt a pro-innovation mindset toward digital assets and blockchain technologies. So that's kind of setting the table. But Brian, what are your initial takeaways on this report and why is it important?
Yeah, so first, broad brush, what a difference an election makes, because under the Biden administration, we sort of famously had to sue the administration for trying to cut off our access to energy. The Operation Choke Point, they were trying to cut off our access to banking. They were trying to, that was in the era of censorship on social media. So actually, your predecessor, Sam, and I did an op-ed on those things about deplatforming, debanking, and unplugging, all the different attack vectors the last administration was using to really hamper the growth of the industry in the United States. Here, we have the White House issuing a report on how to foster the growth of the industry in the United States. So I do want to take just a second to congratulate everybody who worked on this. I know Bo Hines and Tyler Williams at the Treasury Department, Andrew Rittenhouse, and many others spent countless hours and going through the arduous interagency process required to put reports out like this. We did reports on regulatory plans when I worked at the Treasury Department. They are no easy feat just to get them done. So the overall mission of this and the amount of work that went into it, congratulations to the team on getting this out. Now, on some specific issues that we care deeply about, I want to start with Operation Choke Point because that was such a flashpoint and such a clear contrast between how the last administration and this administration are approaching digital assets. The quote from the report: under the Trump administration, Operation Choke Point 2.0 is dead, not just in spirit, but in substance. Strong. That is strong. I love it. And it encourages the prudential regulators to keep it dead and to reinvigorate its industry engagement regarding innovation. That's very good stuff. One thing I found interesting, they don't seem to be pushing for any legislation on this front. One of the things that the bank regulators were doing is they're eliminating reputational risk as a factor for banking evaluations. It's pretty narrow. I think by not pursuing legislation, you could open the door to future abuses. So I would be curious to hear the thinking on that. Now, I have seen the legislative process when it comes to the Safe Banking Act, Safer Banking Act, and the potential of having no more choke point language, for lack of a better way of saying it. Pardon my inarticulateness on this, but there have been some legislative efforts to prevent debanking based on, unless it is clearly dealing with threats to the stability of the financial system and not politics. There have been efforts like that. Curious to me that they did not suggest or really endorse any legislative efforts, just sort of having the regulators go full bore leaning into technology. Perhaps they think that could sort of cement the status of things sufficiently without legislation. I found that one a little curious. But again, the language that choke point 2.0 is dead, not just in spirit, but in substance, very strong. The next key issue I think that really caught my attention here, CBDCs, central bank digital currencies. Of course, the president had addressed these in an executive order right off the bat. A quote here from the report: retail CBDCs pose risks to individual rights, financial systems, and the sovereignty of the United States. Wholeheartedly agree, very strong. And actually, in contrast with the choke point issue, they actually did seem to endorse the legislative path here with the Anti-CBDC Surveillance State Act, which the majority whip in the House, Tom Emmer, sponsored, and which passed with only 2 Democrat votes, but it still passed the House. The report did seem to endorse a legislative front on that. So strong language in the report and endorsing a legislative solution, in addition to the administration's position, which has already been stated. They don't support it. They do not want CBDCs. They see how it could be abused and lead to government surveillance of people's accounts and transactions. And you can see in places like China where the government is making decisions for people, saying you can't buy X today. Imagine how it could manifest in the United States if there's perhaps a Democratic president, then maybe they want to prevent people from buying a firearm. Or if they're particularly concerned with climate change, maybe no more beef today, or you can't buy another gallon of gas today, or whatever it may be. So just strong language opposed to a CBDC. That's great. And they seem to support a legislative path to banning a retail CBDC as well. And there was a tweet on this from our friend Matthew Pines at the Bitcoin Policy Institute. He highlighted this issue as well. Now, since we are in the business of mining Bitcoin, I think there was a great quote about Bitcoin miners in the report. It read, Bitcoin miners do not hold accounts, deposits, or token balances for their users, nor do they have any customer information at the protocol level. Miners have no role in custody, lending, or token issuance, and operate similarly to a data center business with low uptime requirements. Such makes them well-suited partners for utility load response programs and grid stability. Hear, hear. Amen. And that is in stark contrast to, for example, Senator Elizabeth Warren's legislation that she introduced that would effectively treat Bitcoin miners like banks and pretends that they really have control over customer assets, which they do not. So this report expressly acknowledges what miners are, and more importantly, what they're not. That is a nice recognition of the reality of the technology. Now, on a related issue, money transmitters, who are they? Who aren't they? Who can actually control assets? Who could be subject to Bank Secrecy Act obligations, things like that. Peter Van Valkenburg from Coin Center actually had a quite informative tweet thread on this and other issues. So we can throw up that tweet so people can find it. He's a smart guy. I don't know him, but I have followed him on social media and find his takes to be pretty insightful. So I appreciated his very clear-eyed view of some of the contents of this report. So on the money transmitter issue, what is and what isn't, this control notion, who's actually controlling customer assets, who has custody over funds, who's actually in a position to deal with illicit finance issues versus who's really not, based on what the technology does and doesn't do. So I thought that was very encouraging in the report, that they did specifically talk about this concept of control over assets. Very smart, very good recognition of reality. He did flag something that I thought was interesting and a pretty good point. that the report suggests there could be new digital asset subgroups for Bank Secrecy Act compliance. It doesn't seem very tech neutral. It is something that perhaps, if it's an administration again that doesn't support this industry, could be abused if they were to go down that road. I kind of see where he's coming from there. So I think a fair and nuanced take on that particular point. Taxation, of course, we have talked about it a lot on this pod. How should block rewards, mining rewards be treated? If you're entering new Bitcoin into circulation, how should that be treated? Now, the report didn't take a firm position, in my view. They did suggest the IRS should consider new guidance. They should consider rescinding old guidance. That's a good signal, strong signal, I think. They talked about potential legislation to address this issue, including what should commodity rules apply to, which to me suggests that they're thinking of exactly what we're talking about. Block rewards entering new Bitcoin into circulation, treating it like a commodity. Again, they sort of make these suggestions that of things Congress and the IRS should consider. They don't necessarily take a firm position on it. So glad they've recognized the issue and have suggested that the administration is going to, we'll see some movement on those issues. A little vague on what that movement will be, but hopefully it will be positive. And we have learned that Congressman Max Miller, who I know from the White House, good guy, represents Ohio. He is introducing a digital asset tax reform package. Senator Lummis introduced a discussion draft of digital asset tax reform. My understanding is both would tackle these issues pretty head on, slightly different ways, but they'll both deal with it. And hopefully the chambers can reconcile and come to a common understanding of how these should be treated. Interesting, they also suggest the IRS should look at guidance for a de minimis exemption so that people can more easily use Bitcoin in transactions and other digital assets in transactions. That's very good. I have long advocated that they have the authority to do this. They have done it in other areas of the tax laws. So good that they're actually suggesting that Treasury IRS should take a look at that. Very good, good stuff. Not as firm probably as we would prefer, but good that the content of the report suggests that they are going to go down a path of digital asset tax reform, even though it's not super specific about what they're going to do. There are some tea leaves in there that we can read that I think show optimistic signals to us. And then probably more broadly, I'd be remiss if I don't mention the two legislative priorities here regarding the Genius Act for stablecoins and the Clarity Act for market structure. And they lean pretty hard in there for implementing the Genius Act and then finally passing a comprehensive market structure bill. No surprise there, but good position to take. So that's pretty good rundown, I think. There's a lot more in this report. So I would encourage our viewers, it's publicly available. It's 168 pages. If you're interested in these things, please review it. Send us your hot takes. Let us know what you think about it. Those are some of my key takeaways here. It's been out for less than 24 hours. So we'll see what others have to say about it. I'm sure smarter people than us will have some good commentary as well. But those are the quick takeaways.
Yeah, that's great. And as you said, it's been out less than 24 hours and it's a big report. And I even think Matthew Pine's tweet kind of said that, like, wow, I saw this thing today that, it didn't really stand out to me before, but this is a big thing. And so just dig into it. If there's anything you like, you love, feel free to point it out. But of course, it is human nature to look at a 168-page report and find that one page that you don't love. And there was some initial reporting that had some mixed thoughts on sort of the scope of the strategic Bitcoin reserve and the digital stockpile language in the report. So again, mixed thoughts on it. Some people are like, hey, it's in there and they have some stuff. And other people are saying, well, they don't really flesh it out. But what are your thoughts on this? And do you think maybe there's a need for a broader, perhaps even a legislatively created strategic Bitcoin reserve like we did in Texas?
Yeah. So I do think that's a good idea. I like that the Bitcoin Act has co-sponsors in both the House and the Senate. Congressman Begich is leading the effort in the House from Alaska. Senator Lummis leading the effort in the Senate. I do like the Bitcoin Act. I think that's a solid piece of legislation. In this report, I think I had tempered expectations compared to what I was reading in the media. I would kind of chuckle when there were reports that, like, oh, this is going to be the definitive document for the SBR, the Strategic Bitcoin Reserve. I kind of knew that wouldn't be the case. That's a separate executive order. I figured they'd mention it in this report, but I didn't think they were going to dig super deep into it, and they didn't. That said, they kind of took away some of the doubt where previous documents had said they should look at this, they should consider the legal issues involved, they should look at potentially accumulating Bitcoin through tax neutral measures. This sort of takes away that initial take of let's look at this, and this says, like, we're going to do it. And I think that's positive. The things that are in there that are not particularly surprising, but they're substantive, is, it's going to be administered by the Treasury Department. It's going to be capitalized by forfeited digital assets. Important distinction between forfeited and seized, because if assets are seized in, criminal actions or civil asset forfeiture, the fruits of poisonous trees, if you will, illicit activity, there are legal processes that happen after seizure to determine if the government actually takes title to it or not. So, using that word forfeited is a legally important term, and I think legally correct. They also talk about how there are some statutory requirements when assets are forfeited in legal proceedings. Sometimes they're required to go to victims. Sometimes they're meant to be shared with law enforcement agencies for equipment and the like. There's some legal requirements that still exist there. I was aware of those beforehand, so this is not a surprise, but it's an important thing for people, for SBR watchers to be aware of. These are legal requirements, and when you think about it, they kind of make sense. So things to keep in mind. The government may have possession of many, many, hundreds of thousands of Bitcoin, but there may be only a portion of those that are forfeited where the government actually has title to them. And then even if the government has title, they may be obligated to allocate those in a certain way. So things to keep in mind. But then they really do kind of lean in on the government accumulating Bitcoin, stacking sats for its strategic reserve. They do not shed light on how they're going to do that. Bo Hines has said in interviews, he's made bullish comments that they have lots of different ideas for doing this. So I think TBD, there's more to come on this. I understand you got to crawl before you can walk. They've been doing a lot of work, and you can't do everything overnight. So I think they deserve a little bit of grace as they put the meat on the bones of this initiative. So optimism, and we keep marching on the SBR.
And I think the point that you made about this is an idea to we're going to do this, that is significant. As we sort of watched this issue in Texas, there was the concern about, hey, how are we going to fund it? Let's fund 21 million. That's a very clever number. And they ended up with 10 million, and people can be upset about that. Or you can say, wow, created a strategic Bitcoin reserve, in this case in Texas, or in this case of this report here in the United States. And so that is significant. And as you said, they have a lot of ideas, and let's crawl, and then we can walk, and then we can run. So very exciting. It's a great recap, Brian, of that report. And they're on the heels of the digital asset report that came out this week. There was another major pro-innovation series of documents actually, that were released by the Trump administration last week. There was the AI action plan and an executive order on accelerating data center infrastructure. And we very briefly discussed this in last week's episode, so you can go back and listen or watch that episode for some initial contemporaneous thoughts. Kind of like the commentary we just had is very contemporaneous. It's been out less than 24 hours. It's kind of the same situation last week when we recorded last week's episode, but it's a great episode. So the action plan is built on 3 pillars: to accelerate AI innovation, to build American AI infrastructure, and to lead in international AI diplomacy and security. So kind of a broad or holistic strategy. Then alongside the action plan, the president issued an executive order entitled Accelerating Federal Permitting of Data Center Infrastructure. And so that executive order is kind of a more operational manual for Pillar 2, the action plan, which is building out the infrastructure. So, Brian, how do these two actions fit together, and how do they help America lead and win the AI race?
Yeah, so I do see these as very related, not just because, Riot is mining Bitcoin as a bootstrapping mechanism to now launch a data center business as well, not just because of the mechanics of how businesses are evolving, but because they're two such fundamental functions for creating the next wave of economic growth and hopefully individual freedom and American dominance. So with Bitcoin mining, we're talking about the next generation of money and transferring value. With AI, we're talking about how everyone in the world is going to consume information more efficiently. And of course, there's physical AI, robotics, and other things that are going to help advance manufacturing faster. But in terms of chatbots and the things people are using on a daily basis today, it's really how the world is going to consume information. And so if the US is going to continue to lead the world, you need to grow faster than other countries. We need to grow the fastest. That's how we became a superpower to begin with. After the Industrial Revolution, through to the World Wars, through to the Cold War, it was our economic dominance that led to military dominance, that led to diplomatic dominance. And so we really do need to harness these technologies to maintain our superpower status. I said at the Bitcoin Policy Institute Summit, it is not inevitable that America remains a superpower. I want it to remain a superpower, but every superpower in history has collapsed. And there are various reasons for that. But I think in this day and age, it would be if we lose economic growth dominance, if we don't grow faster than our adversaries. So I think these are the keys to growth: the future of value and the future of information. So with that as kind of the backdrop, you mentioned the data center executive order. I think it's very important. The executive branch doesn't have all the power in the world here. So there's going to be state and local regulations that are implicated. There's going to be a lot of coordination required with the private sector, of course, but they've taken some pretty smart actions here, I think. The EO's aimed at streamlining the permitting process. Again, there's a lot of state and local rules that have to go into that, but streamlining permitting, bringing federal resources to bear, including federal lands where energy resources exist, where you could have data center infrastructure. There's a lot of talk about workforce development. Mike Rowe, famous host of Dirty Jobs, gave a talk recently where he talked about how AI can replace some jobs, but a lot of jobs won't be replaced. And a lot of jobs are going to be even more necessary in this new economy than maybe they even have been in the past, especially tradesmen. We need more electricians. We need HVAC technicians. We need engineers. And, they don't necessarily acquire 4-year degrees, from elite universities. So, we need to really focus on apprenticeships. We need to focus on the sorts of jobs that are going to help the US economy thrive with, in particular, data center development, and also in particular, reliable dispatchable power. The biggest input into both Bitcoin and AI is energy. It is by far the biggest input into both types of businesses. And Secretary Wright, the Secretary of Energy at the AI Summit, I think got some pushback from Jason Calacanis in particular from the All In Pod when he was suggesting that intermittent renewables, wind and solar, are not necessarily the best sources to have a reliable grid for these businesses, because you need power even when the sun isn't shining and the wind isn't blowing. I don't know if Jason was talking his book. I suspect maybe he was. Perhaps he's a solar investor. But Secretary Wright was exactly right that natural gas and nuclear produce the reliable baseload power that's going to be required for peak demand whenever it may be, whether that is when the sun's shining and wind's blowing or not. So I think recognizing that reality is a harsh one to some, but it's a correct one. It really is the right way of looking at it. And people in Pennsylvania, people in Texas, people in other energy rich states already know this. People who work in and around electric grids know this. But I think promising that the administration just flat out said it and recognized it. So I'm just going through our notes here, making sure I caught everything. think that's the gist of it. But very glad that they recognize both the philosophical sort of existential nature of these issues and the practical on the ground steps needed to help America lead. So that's kind of my take on the AI action plan.
Yeah, absolutely. And I've as I think through this, there's both of, and you hit both of those aspects. You hit the technological, the mechanical aspects, and then kind of that underlying current of American leadership, American values, American exceptionalism. The president called it a national security imperative. He clearly planted his flag on America's bold ambition to be the technological, the economic, and the cultural leader in AI and energy and more. That was a thread throughout these reports and some of the sound bites or quotes that they got from other folks in the administration, and like people like Marco Rubio talking about how important it is to export American AI to our allies. And then the thing that the president's been very clear on as well about upholding free speech principles and having technology that's objective, quote, objective and free from top-down ideological bias. That's a very clear thread throughout this as well. So it really is, as I look back on these documents, and as a staffer who's worked on these types of documents before, it's very clear that they've spotted the right issues and that they've been very thoughtful about it. And there's going to be more details to come out, more executive action, maybe some legislation, and it's always, the devil's always in the details. What does it say between those four corners of the page? But they've taken the time to think about this well. So I would definitely encourage the listeners to go check out these documents.
That ideological bias point is important because we've already seen quote unquote woke AI and how jarring that can be, or if that really gets into the bloodstream and that's how people are consuming information, you're going to hold back growth. You're going to limit human freedom. When Google, the first iteration of Gemini from Google was showing Black George Washington, things like that, where you're just not recognizing reality. Like, if this is how people are going to consume information, they need to consume accurate information to make good decisions. So I like to say, if Bitcoin is sound money, which I think it is, we're restoring this notion of sound money that reflect the real price, then I think AI, unbiased AI, is sound information. And that's going to help people make good decisions, lead to better growth, lead to a freer humanity. And then I think, the one other thing you touched on, but I think bears repeating, is this idea of exporting the American tech stack. And, we're more advanced for now than other countries. If China were to manufacture the most advanced chips in the world and they started to get a foothold and a lead in this area, then all of a sudden it's much less of a focus on freedom and accurate information and more of a focus on helping China take over the world, right? So, like, who knows what kind of information would be infused in that. I think it really is important for the American tech stack to be the global standard. And I think that's just a visionary approach that I had heard David Sachs talk about in the past. And I think he brought with him into this position in government. Just absolutely visionary and totally correct. A really important point that the administration's made here.
Absolutely. And that cannot and should not be lost. And I'm glad it's kind of the last point we made on that. Well, we'll now switch over to our final segment. We'll end it in the traditional way with the grab bag segment. And I am a huge pro wrestling fan. And so, to borrow a phrase from The Undertaker, who may or may not go to my church, I want to say rest in peace to the incredible Hulk Hogan, who died last week at age 71. And that's a pretty hard life to get to 71. Hulk Hogan, though, he was the embodiment of Vince McMahon's vision to turn professional wrestling into what Vince McMahon calls sports entertainment. Hulk Hogan, he was the first major crossover star. He was a cultural icon, and he really loved wrestling. I read a story that he was working on a project with Eric Bischoff from the WCW days, that he wanted to elevate freestyle wrestling into the mainstream. And that was really cool to see. And there was a lot of iconic moments from his match against Andre the Giant at WrestleMania 3. He left UF and he went to this startup break, Ted Turner's WCW. He started the NWO, the New World Order, and WCW dominated what was called the Monday Night Wars in the late 90s and early 2000s. But then WWE, as it became, kind of won out. They bought WCW, and Hollywood Hulk Hogan, the bad guy, returned to WCW, to WWE, and he had a tremendous match against The Rock at WrestleMania 18. So Terry Bollea, the man, is dead, but the immortal Hulk Hogan will live on.
R.I.P., brother. And I was at the Republican National Convention when he gave his iconic speech in support of President Trump, and he ripped off his shirt from the podium.
Yes.
Honestly, it was the best speech of the entire convention. And it wasn't even close. It was hilarious. It was entertaining. It was heartfelt. It was great. And I also, child of the 80s and 90s, Hulk Hogan is immortal. So he will be missed. For my grab bag, I was watching some of the festivities at the Baseball Hall of Fame. We have a new class of inductees. Of course, I'm a Yankee fan, so I loved seeing CC Sabathia get inducted into the Hall of Fame as a Yankee. I think that was a very happy occasion. It was really cool to see how excited he was, as celebrated and as accomplished a ball player as CC is. He was like a kid in a candy store. I mean, just posting everything on social media, his family there with him, smiles from ear to ear. It was great. But a speech actually caught my attention from Ichiro, and he was only briefly a Yankee. I think he went in as a Mariner because he spent most of his career as a Seattle Mariner.
I have been asked, what's the best thing you can do for your team? My answer is taking responsibility for yourself. Being responsible for yourself means answering to yourself. When you go home at night and wonder why you didn't get a hit or you didn't make a catch, the honest answer is not because a great pitcher beat you or a tough sun was in your eyes. It's because there was something you could have done better. By taking responsibility for yourself, you support your teammates and you don't cheat the fans.
His speech, actually, a chunk of it reflected the extreme ownership leadership style, which we have here, which they do it for lots of companies. Jocko Willink and Leif Babin run this extreme ownership training program based on Navy SEAL training, which is all about what can I do to help the team, all about taking accountability for yourself. And that was the essence of Ichiro's speech. It was, if you had a rough game, you dropped a fly ball, you struck out, whatever it may be, it's not because you faced a pitcher that was too good or that the sun was in your eyes. Like, you have to immediately take accountability. And the answer to the question is, how can I help my teammates? It's take accountability for yourself, being just ultimately accountable. What can I do better? How can I be the best version of myself for my team? He said it in baseball terms, but I think it applies to life. And I just really appreciated his speech. He was obviously a fabulous ball player, totally deserving of the Hall of Fame. And I thought his speech was just a great life lesson for kids everywhere. It was almost like a commencement speech that I would love to hear, like at a university. So congratulations to CC, congratulations to Ichiro and the other inductees into the Baseball Hall of Fame. Very cool event. So, all right, I think that's it for this week's episode. Thanks, everybody, for joining us. Don't forget to check out the pod on Rumble, YouTube, Apple, Spotify. Like, subscribe, send us notes. Follow me on X at MorgansternNJ. We will also be posting episodes from the archives. So some of the episodes that Sam and I did back in the day that live on Rumble, Zach is doing an awesome job posting them periodically on all of these other channels. So if you haven't gone back and listened to some of our hot takes on economic, political, business issues, Bitcoin, of course, over the last couple of years, the archives episodes are coming out periodically. So go ahead and check those out. Again, on X at MorgansternNJ, subscribe, like the pod on Rumble, YouTube, Apple, Spotify. We will see you again soon. I believe we will be off next week due to some travel obligations, but we'll see you again soon, and enjoy the archives. And we'll see you next time on the Peer-to-Peer Policy Pod. Thanks, everybody. you.